Hi there, everyone. Welcome. My name's Christy Spire. I'm the team leader of Nature Education here at Green Adelaide, and I would like to welcome you aboard for this next hour. I'd like to start by acknowledging this amazing country that we all get to meet on in lots of different shapes and forms today. Ngadlu Tampanthi, Ngadlu Ghana, Yatanga Imparenthi, which means we acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people, and we acknowledge and respect the connection that Kaurna people hold with their land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I know that many of you meeting with us today have the honour of working with Kaurna people here and coming to understand this country a lot more through being in relationship with them. So thank you so much to all of those in the Kaurna Nation who give of their time and of their knowledge for the benefit of us all. This is the fourth instalment of our seminar series for 2025, can you believe it already? Which we are running to help share the great work happening to make Adelaide cooler, greener, wilder and more climate resilient. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Green Adelaide YouTube channel, where the rest of our webinar series is also located if you want to catch up on any other sessions in the past. So today's webinar is kind of a little bit one-directional, but you are invited to ask questions at any time by putting them into the Q&A section, and we will answer as many of these as we can at the end of the session. And so just in case you've forgotten where you've landed, today's session is dubbed Get the Buzz on Adelaide's native bees with Katja Hogendoorn. And we're very excited to welcome Katja, who's a senior researcher at the University of Adelaide and a leading expert in bee ecology and conservation. Adelaide is home to more than 150 species of native bees, each playing a vital role in pollinating our native flora. Yet despite their importance, much about these fascinating insects and what we can all do to protect them remains a mystery. Today, Katja will provide us all with an overview of the unique ecology and behaviour of Adelaide's native bees, with a special focus on the golden pea bee and an exciting project aimed at bringing this delightful bee back to our suburban landscapes. We're very excited to have you, Katja. I'll stop sharing and let you share your beautiful images and presentation. Thanks so much.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar and listening to me. I love talking about native bees, and I'm talking to you from the land of the Kaurna people. As you already heard, I have an accent. I'm Dutch, and I arrived in Australia with my family in 1996. And so we have been here for about 30 years. But I was already, when I arrived, a native bee specialist, but knew nothing about Australian native bees, so had to learn a lot. And so I can only, I'm not even sure that I can call myself a native bee specialist, but I'm getting better. So native bees are my love and my hobby and my fascination. I work in crop pollination, partly also with honeybees, but if I can, with native bees, and I do a lot of conservation projects on native bees. So I'm particularly going to talk about the pea bee today. Let's go to the next slide. When I say I know about native bees and talk about them, I often get people who say, oh, I know a native beehive, and those are bees that fly in and out very rapidly into a hollow, and there are many of them. These people I have to disappoint, because those are not native bees. They are, of course, introduced honeybees, and the honeybees have been introduced in the 1820s. They are absolutely essential for crop pollination, but they were introduced to make honey, and at the moment still 80% of the revenue of the beekeeping industry is honey, mainly eucalyptus honey. But they are really important pollinators. We need them here for crop pollination, but that's not the bees I am talking about today. What I am talking about is the native bees that were here for millions of years. It is, there's 20,000 known species in the world. about 2,500 in Australia, but we don't know them all yet. We know about 1,700 so far. And very recently, that will soon be in the news, we described 71 new species for Australia. So we are still discovering a lot of bees, and there is still a lot to discover about them. Now, what do they look like? Well, they are a very diverse bunch, of course. These are all that what you see here, all South Australian native bees. In the middle, you see a blue-banded bee. It hasn't got blue bands, this one. It's got white bands, but it still belongs in the group of blue-banded bees. I'm sure that you have seen these, or many of you have seen this. If I could choose, I would call them hover bees, because they hover very much in front of flowers. And they are generalists. You see them on a lot of plants, including introduced cottage plants. Now, on the top, the neon blue bee, that is a parasitic bee of the blue-banded bee. It goes to the nest of the blue-banded bee, and then when the blue-banded bee is out foraging, it puts an egg there, and the egg will hatch once the bee has laid her egg, and it will eat the larva will eat the egg and then eat the pollen supplies of the bee, and out comes a parasitic bee and not a blue-banded bee. Above the blue-banded bee, you see the teddy bear bee, and then there are many other species of bees. In the corner, the brilliant green bee is the carpenter bee from Kangaroo Island. It is only just hanging in there because the old areas, unburnt areas where it still can nest, this is where there's also a lot of interest from the beekeeping industry, and so it struggles to find enough food, but it's a gorgeous bee. As you can see, there's diversity in colors here, but there's also diversity in size. And what you see here is one of the largest bees in Australia. It is a carpenter bee, but not the green carpenter bee, and it's a male of the species. And on its wing is one of the smallest bees. Now, you might think, oh, that must be a juvenile, but no, that is an adult. Those bees are the bees that specialize on eucalypts, and when it is warm outside and there's a flowering eucalypt, and you look up and you see the air shimmering, then there can be thousands upon thousands of these little bees, and they probably nest in the ground under the tree, and all they do is fly up and down the whole day when the tree's in flower. Thousands. So that is a very tiny bee. There's variation in size, but not only in size, there's also variation in how they collect pollen. Some bees graze pollen off the flowers, others collect it in hairs on their belly, and some carry it wet like honeybees do. Those are the stingless bees. We haven't got them in South Australia, but they are in the tropical and semi-tropical areas. There's 11 species in total, and many bees collect the pollen in the hairs on their body and then move it in the hairs on their legs to carry it to their nest. So what do they do with the pollen in their nest? Well, depends a bit on what the nest looks like as well. So there's several substrates. There is bees nesting in twigs. There are bees digging their own nest in wood, as you can see here. There are bees that use mud brick. The blue-banded bees do that, or washouts, and they dig in the mud by spitting nectar out and then removing the dirt. And there are bees that make their own resin pots, and they make that from the resin, from the sap of eucalypt trees, and they hang them off a twig like that. So that is an example of where bees nest, but about 70% or 75% just nests in the ground. and they can nest in the ground on their own. There is a tunnel, they make a tunnel, and then they make brood cells on the side, or they can nest together in a nest. And sometimes there are hundreds of animals nesting together. It's like a big apartment building. Everyone does their own thing, but they use the same entrance. And there is safety in numbers. They've got better defenses against ants that way. Okay, so that's nesting substrate. What happens in a nest? Well, these are photos from when I did my PhD a long time ago. And I had observation nests of the carpenter bee I was studying. And the bees collect pollen and nectar and bring that into a room, a brood cell we call that, and they shape it into a bowl. And then they put an egg on it. And then they close that little room so that the larva can eat its pollen in peace, and they make a next one. That is how most bees do it. They're solitary, all of them, and most bees do that for about 4 or 6 weeks. Not this one. This one does it for a bit longer. It lives long. Carpenter bees live for more than a year and encounter their offspring, and that is also why they are so vulnerable, apart from, of course, nesting in wood. They protect the nest until the offspring comes out. And what you see here is developing brood in a nest. On top is a white pupa. In the gallery below that, there are 3 big larvae, and the gallery below that has just been provisioned. Now you look a little bit later, and what you see is the white pupa has turned into a black pupa. The larvae have all turned into pupae, and below that, in the back brood cell, you see a larva chomping away on the nectar. So very soon, in this case, the brown pupa will come out as a female probably and will encounter her mother. And that is what I studied for my PhD. What happens then? They fight over dominance. One of them, if the mother wins the fight, the daughter may leave. But if the daughter wins the fight, the mother will stay in the nest and protect the rest of her offspring, which is quite interesting. Good. So, but most bees provision a nest for 4 to 6 weeks, about at most 6, and then they die, and their offspring will come out the next year in hope of flowers. Because, so as you know, bees are often photographed on flowers. Why? Well, because flowers provide their only food. So they use pollen for protein for their offspring, but also for themselves a bit. And they use nectar to fly and as carbs. And so when there are no flowers, there can be no bees. And that is a very, very important message. Okay. So let me see. Yeah. Bees are in decline, and that is really unfortunate. And this picture gives you sort of reasons. Those reasons are all to do with us. There is climate change causing fires and storms and floods and droughts, as we have now at the moment here. There's deforestation, and let me see, there's something. Sorry. There's agriculture, there's urbanization, there's pollution and nitrification. And of course, there are invasive species that compete directly with bees and with other insects. And there are invasive species such as goats that eat a lot of the bee food that is out there. So this causes then a lack of food largely in the landscape, and that is what we're dealing with. Apart from pesticides and pollution, which is also an issue, the big issue is lack of food in the landscape. And that, unfortunately, is increasing not only in this country, but everywhere else in the world. And we can do things, of course, to help. And that's what I'll talk about, because this is a bit of a somber vision that those bee declines. But it is important to know that not all bees are in decline. Just like with birds, some thrive with urbanization. Magpies and bin chickens do really well, and honeybees are actually doing really well, apart from during a drought like this, when they struggle to find nectar like any other bee. The blue-banded bees also do really well normally, but not during drought. And in actual fact, the honeybees have increased very much. When you look at how many managed hives there were in 1961, the number of hives has doubled, more than doubled, because this goes to the 2021. Generalists can feed on very many sources of pollen. The species that suffer most are the specialists. Now, how can we help bees? That's what I'll do first, and then I'll talk more about the specialists. How can we help bees? There are a number of don'ts, and I'll mention a few. Of course, when you have a garden, don't use pesticides. They will kill bees, especially the systemic ones, because they will stay in the ground and be taken up by the plants and the flowers can become toxic for a very long time. Neonicotinoids are among those systemic ones. Then do plant bee food. If you have a pool and pavement and a lawn and non-flowering hedges and pine trees, there is no food for bees in your garden. And so then you're not helping really. And the third is, don't take a honeybee hive, because you'd be adding 40,000 mouths to feed. And in a situation where there is a lack of food, one of the simplest things you should not do is add mouths to feed. Really, they displace a lot of native bees that are solitary. Then, of course, there are do's. You can make a bee hotel. Well, what you do is you take some bamboos, you can bundle them and fix them somewhere covered, where the rain doesn't come in, under an eave or something, in the full shade works best, and about a meter or a bit more from the ground, so that the ants cannot find it as easily. That is all well and good, but as we know now, in a bee hotel, bees will reproduce, and what they need to reproduce is food. So that is the most important thing that you can do: plant bee food. And local native flowering plants are absolute the best. Plants introduced from overseas are not so good at all. They only feed a couple of generalists. So the blue-banded bee really likes cottage plants and lavender, English lavender. But most bees, the majority of native bees, only go for native plants and not for introduced plants. Why? Well, we can be reminded about the koala. The koala only eats eucalypt leaves. It has evolved with this very rich and abundant food source locally. And it is very good at breaking down the toxins in the eucalypt leaves. Not many other species can do that to a great extent, but the koala can do it. It can't eat anything else, though. So it has co-evolved to be completely reliant on eucalypts. Now, the koala isn't the only one who is completely reliant on eucalypts. There are several bee species, about, well, I think maybe 40–50% of all bee species in Australia rely completely on eucalypts. And so they can, the defensive chemicals that are in the leaves are also in the pollen, because a plant doesn't want its pollen necessarily to be eaten, and so it doesn't want everybody to take the pollen and eat it. They want it transported. So they make it difficult to digest. And the bees that have evolved with this have learned how to digest that. But that doesn't mean that they can digest anything else. So these bees can absolutely not digest the pollen from roses. It's just not in their system, because the roses have different defenses. And that's funny, because we have exported our eucalypts worldwide. And when I ask people from Spain or California or Greece, what bees go to your eucalypts, they say, well, we don't look at that. We know there are only honeybees there. So we have a truckload of bee species on eucalypts, but they don't, because their bees have not evolved to be able to work with the toxins of the eucalypts. Good. So that is why native plants are so important. But there are other ways in which pollen defends itself. So there can be, so that they are taken by only a few species by the most efficient pollinators. Some pollen kernels are very, very big, and so most bees will struggle to collect them. And other pollen kernels are very, very spiky. It's very possible that it needs a specialist larva to digest that spiky pollen and not be damaged by it. So pollen has got chemical defenses and also mechanical defenses not to be eaten. But there is more. Some species have really tight flowers, and the bees need to get in there. That is Personia, the one in the top right hand of your screen, is a flower that is very tight and has a specialist bee that will pollinate it. There's not only bees relying on eucalypt, there are also bees relying on Banksia. The Banksia bee, its larva only eats pollen from Banksias. When there are no Banksias, the bee can't be there. For the Personia bee, it's the same thing. And then there are bees specializing on Wallenbergia, the bluebells. There are bees specializing on Malva. They don't collect anything else. There are many bees in the arid center specializing on Eremophilus. And then there is a whole suite of species that are important plant species for some bee species that I'm not even mentioning. It's really, there's a lot of specialization out there. And that means that you can't plant one or a few species and think that you have served all the bees in your area. So we need to be smart to help those bees. This is again the lovely resin pulp bees, of which we described 71 new species, and very many of the resin pulp bees we have only caught on Eremophila. There's a suite of other bee species specializing on Eremophila. Eremophila has got a constriction in its flower, and many of the bees that are specializing on Eremophila have developed very narrow faces, so that they can, and very long tongues, so that they can push their head into that restriction and just reach the nectar that is out there. So what to plant then, eh? It's not that easy. There are some guides. The Wing Bee Foundation puts out powerful pollinator guides. If you search for that, put that into your search engine, then you will find one that I did for the Adelaide Hills and one that Richard Katz did for Kangaroo Island. And that has got very good advice for the local native plants that are good for native bees. And of course, you'll have to go for a combination. Another source is my leaflet, Food for Native Bees, that also can be found on the web. It is for the Adelaide and Mount Lofty ranges. And what I did is I split the best plants up in big trees, shrubs, smaller shrubs, and ground covers and climbers. And I tell you about when it flowers and about whether it produces pollen only or pollen and nectar. And then I also indicate with a little blue-banded bee whether the plant is buzz-pollinated. And that, I think, is very important to know about, because buzz-pollinated plants are plants that honeybees cannot access. So this is one of the reasons why our blue-banded bees do so very well. They're great buzz pollinators, and they can access pollen in our native plants that honeybees cannot use, because honeybees cannot buzz. And there are very many buzz-pollinated plants that are good for bees in South Australia and in Australia as a whole. We've got our solanums, our kangaroo apples, for example. We've got our black-eyed Susan. We've got the sennas. We've got the flax lilies and chocolate lilies and fringe lilies, and of course the guinea flowers or Hibbertia. And they are all buzz pollinated. So that is really great. And now I'll show you a bit about how buzz pollination is. It is the pollen is inside the anther, so not on the outside. It looks nice and yellow here, but the pollen is on the inside, and the bee needs to shake it out. Now, the first video is a quick video, but there's something wrong with it. But you will see you will be able to hear the buzz. And the second video is the buzz in slow motion, and I'll talk over that one. So, if you go. Okay, so the second video was done by Colin Switzer from Harvard, and he came to Australia and he filmed this process of this buzz pollination in slow motion. And we thought that the bees would be tensing their wing muscles and shaking the flower. But we found that that is not what they do. They tap the flower from the side and then make the pollen fall out on their belly. And then they go up and they brush the pollen into the hairs on their legs. So we wrote a paper. Other buzz pollinating bees do it differently. His slow motion camera found that. And so we wrote a paper called Shakers and Headbangers. And this headbanging happens at a frequency of about 300 times per second. We couldn't bounce our heads that fast, and there must be several groups of muscles involved to be able to achieve that. It's really absolutely amazing. And I always have a bit of a problem filling this time, because this is only one buzz, one of those that you see, but now the bee is ready to go. Good. So buzz pollinated plants are really important. And now I'm going to talk about another plant that is really important and that I have done, or I'm doing still, a project with that is funded by Green Adelaide. This is the golden PB. The golden PB is still in the hills. It's still in Belair National Park and Anstey Hill and Morialta, but it is not in the suburbs. It's active in from end of August to October when the bitter peas flower. It relies completely on bitter peas and it nests in the ground. So it's a specialist and it can't eat anything else. And therefore, we need to plant bitter peas. So we have in our area 3 species of bitter pea: the leafless bitter pea, the narrow leaf bitter pea, and the gorse bitter pea. The outer ones are both very, very prickly. They're lovely and the bees really like them, but they are very prickly. So I have been focusing my project on the narrow leaf bitter pea, which is a shrub of around 1.5 meters high. It grows, can grow out if you water it. And it produces masses of flowers in from between August and October when it flowers. It's a really, really attractive plant. And I planted it in my garden. I started in 2012, and 5 years later, I attracted the golden PB to my garden. I found it foraging in my garden. Now I live in leafy suburbs, so I was pretty pleased to see that that bee was still there and that I could attract it. And so after that, my next door neighbor took 5 honeybee hives, and I haven't seen that bee since. I don't think it can find enough food because it's quite a big bee. Smaller bees can still exist next to honeybees, but larger bees really struggle. So, but then I thought, well, if I can do it, we just need more of this, and other people can do it too. And so what I thought is, well, clearly plant enough of it and they will come. So can we bring the golden PB back to the suburbs? And that is the project. What I did is I had plants grown and I gave them to schools and councils, and I gave talks about the PB and organized demonstration plantings at railways, and I talked to Friends of Parks group and gave them plants, and very soon there will be information boards appearing where those plantings have been, and those information boards will tell the people about the PB. The information boards also have a QR code on them, and that QR code links to a 2-minute video about the golden PB. So I'm leaving that legacy in hope that more and more people will plant bitter peas for the golden PB. It's a really great project. We've had at least 10 schools involved, and 3 schools now have a project where they grow the bitter peas themselves and want to plant them out or give them away. And it's really good because it makes people aware. And even for me, it's very much a feel-good project. But for everyone involved, it is a feel-good project. Now, there's not only is that PB an important pollinator of the bitter peas, there are in the hills donkey orchid, and the donkey, this is the wrong way. The donkey orchid is a food mimic of the pea, and bees make a mistake and they visit the donkey orchid thinking that it is a pea. Probably it will even smell like a pea, and then they get pollinia, a sac of pollen on their head. The donkey orchid has no food for the bee, but it will plant a sac of pollen on the bee's head, and you can see that here. This is a very lovely photo made by my former student Elizabeth Williamson. And the bee, therefore, will continue foraging, but it will have to visit another donkey orchid, so make the same mistake twice, to be able to get that pollen scraped off its head. And then the donkey orchids get pollinated because of that. Now think about that. The donkey orchid will only get pollinated if the bees will make a mistake. But that means that those bitter bees need to be there, because otherwise the bees cannot be there, right? So in that way, the donkey orchid relies both on the bees and the presence of those bees. And that is a really important ecological lesson to learn, that we need those bees to have those orchids in the end. And that I think is a very lovely story about this. Now, summary of my talk is very simple. Please plant bee food. And that is not only important for bees, because let's face it, flying is high octane business, also for insects. And they need nectar. Many of them need nectar to fly. Butterflies need nectar. Other flies need nectar. They all need nectar to be able to fly. And without that, they cannot be there. And that is why we see insect declines. But there are also a large number of other species that depend on these insects. There are plenty of birds that eat flying insects. There are bats that eat flying insects. So by planting bee food, you don't only do something for bees, you do something for all these vertebrates that rely on insects as food. And that is really important. And then you provide the right pollinators that can actually make sure that those plants set seeds. So this is a really important thing to do. And when there is a drought, things get really tough for all the animals. So we can do something in our garden, and we get urban biodiversity, and we can learn about it and show our children about it, and be happier. It's known that biodiversity makes people happy. So that's what I want to say, and I'm sure that if you do that, the bees and the birds will say thank you. I say thank you to you and to Green Adelaide for funding the project, and to Elizabeth Williamson, James Dory, Aidan Bradford, and many others for wonderful photos, because I'm not a photographer. And I leave you with 3 QR codes that hopefully you can take photos of. The first one goes to my leaflet about the plants that you can plant in the Adelaide Hills. It's not for the coast, I still need to make that one, but local native is good, and your native nursery can help you select the plants. The second one goes to how to make a bee hotel, but don't make a bee hotel if you don't have a restaurant, and place your bee hotel in the shade where bees can approach it easily and off the ground. And the third QR code goes to the PB video that you can all, where I put on my best David Attenborough voice, and it's his birthday today, so that's why I mentioned that. Okay, so that is what I had to say, and now I will stop sharing and be happy to answer questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yeah, we've got plenty of time for questions, and we've got a few that have come through, but not stacks. But thanks so much, Katja. I was going to ask a cheeky question now in terms of, do you what are you currently researching or honing into at the moment?
Oh, I do a lot of crop pollination work. So I am we've just finished this 71 new species of bees, and we're now tackling another group. I have just written a paper that is not published yet about the use of and the utility for and use of solitary bees for greenhouse pollination, because due to climate change, we will move more and more into controlled temperature situations, and we need the pollinators in there. And maybe we shouldn't only rely on bumblebees, which we don't have in Australia, and honeybees elsewhere. But what will also, so I'm collaborating with the University of Western Sydney to further develop blue-banded bees for pollination. They have taken that on. I have done that in the past, and I am looking at how we can control an important disease that they have, a chalkroot, so that we can breed them reliably, and that the nests don't succumb to this fungus.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, lots of important research going on there. Fantastic. I've got a few questions in here. Let me see where I'll start. Yeah, this was a good one. Are most or all native bees stingless?
All males are stingless.
All males are stingless.
All females have a sting. The stingless bees, which is a special group of 11 species, they have a very short sting that can't come out of their abdomen, so they don't sting you. They're not defenseless, though, because they have a lot of resin in their nest, and when they get angry and you mess around with them, they have a tendency to stuff your orifices and your hair with resin, which is very, very unpleasant. Because they're small, they can get into your nose and your ears and whatnot. It's horrible. But yes, the other sting, but the sting is different from what honeybees have. There's no barbed sting. These bees want to live because they're solitary. They haven't got anyone to defend, it's themselves. So they have a retractable sting. They cause a lot less anaphylactic shock. There's only one known instance in the whole of Australia of anaphylactic shock by a native bee. They're smaller than honeybees. If I have no net and I want to catch it because it's special, I do grab them from flowers and get stung. And so it's not that bad. It can hurt. Some species hurt much more than others, but but they're totally not aggressive. So even if you have a bee hotel, and what you need to do to get stung is actually put your finger in their nest, right? You can stand in front of it, they will go around you, and they're absolutely not aggressive.
So yeah, that's great. A specific query around more the plant food, and I love the concept of the bee restaurant. Which food plants from your list are best for the heavy clay soils on the Adelaide Plains? You might know that, or I'm sure some of our team know that as well.
Look, this I don't know that very well, because
Sure.
I am a bee specialist, but your native nursery will be able to advise you there. And basically, if you download my leaflet and there's a certain species, you can replace that by another species in the same genus, because it will be the same, right? So don't get too hung up about, I have to have this species. It's just an idea. And if another species does better, of the same group, does better in your soil, do take that one.
And there's some other plant resources on Green Adelaide's website as well that will help you with that. And a lot of the native plants do cope with the clay soil much better than the introduced plants. So they'll likely survive. But yeah, like all gardening, it's all a trial and error process, and you win some and you lose some.
Yes, and that is also for the bees. So if you don't know what to plant and it's a local native plant it, and then have a look whether the bees go there. And if they go there, well, plant more of it, obviously.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's so true. I think this again is this question's how long is a piece of string, but how many bee hotels can you have in your standard size urban yard, which I don't think there is a standard size anymore. They're getting smaller and smaller. But I think that relates back to your question of bee food as well.
So we did a project on bee hotels, and we found out that you have to put them in the shade. But what we also looked at is we opened them and looked at what the food was inside those bee hotels. Now, surprise, surprise, nearly all the bees using bee hotels depend completely on eucalypt. So if you want to have a good bee hotel, you need to have eucalypt in the proximity. And very many gardens are too small now to plant a tree in. And that is really sad. But we've got a lot of eucalypts still out there, and they flower after rain. They've just started flowering a bit, I noticed. There won't be much nectar in there, but there is pollen there to get. And that is because of the rains we had, the one day of rain we had around Easter, that they flower now, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, this was a question that came up for me as well, about distance and connectivity. Yeah, what are the connectivity needs, meaning how far will, for example, the pea bees travel to a new bit of pea plant population? What's their kind of
So that's
span?
difficult to say because we haven't, of course, done that for all the bees, but there is some sort of a relationship between the size of the bees and and how far they go. And then the honeybees can travel really very far if if they've got problems with water, they can travel 10 kilometers to get water, which is really far. Normally they won't. They will travel 1 or 2 kilometers, and if there's rich food sources close by, they will stay close to the hive. But native bees, the small ones might go 100 meters. The larger ones might go 500 meters maximum. We'd say around 200 meters is a radius from their nest. They have a nest, right? They have to get back to their nest. So they've got to about 200 meters. And then the big carpenter bees will forage at about a kilometer or a bit more. So it varies with size, and it depends on how much food is where.
Yes. And water sources and that kind of thing. Yeah, how much energy they have to forage further.
Water sources are only for honeybees. Our native bees don't drink water. They drink nectar.
Yeah.
And
right.
So nectar is eucalypt nectar. Many eucalypts are really in tune with birds and bird pollination. As you can imagine, if you have a flowering eucalypt, no bee has a reason to go to the flowering eucalypt next door. They just stay on that one tree, right? But birds, especially lorikeets, they pollinate a lot of our eucalypt. And bird nectar is often quite watery. And bees like some stronger nectar. So they might get the water out of the nectar, but you can also sometimes see them bubbling, and they're moving nectar in and out to evaporate the water. It cools themselves down. So they do it also when it's hot. And then they ingest that bubble again and put it out again to cool down and evaporate the water to make it more efficient to bring back to the nest.
Wow, it's a fascinating world. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Linking to your local and your crop kind of research, which local crops are pollinated by our native bees?
Well, I've done a lot of apple research in the Adelaide Hills, And the generalist bees, especially the bees in the group of the furrow bees or halictids, they can do a lot of apple pollination. And we found one great orchard which is surrounded by native bushland, where a third of the bees on the flowers were native bees. So they can be really important. Very often we don't really stimulate them because they live in the orchard generally. They have to find open ground there to nest in. That is not always available. Then, of course, we spray a lot of fungicides and insecticides now and then, so they would have to be able to cope with that. We don't make it easy for them, and therefore it's not surprising that we don't often see a lot of them, but it is their presence is clearly related to having other food sources, so having native vegetation close by.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. There's a question around resources. Are there resources around that explain how long plants and animals stay toxic for when using herbicides? I was just trying to think through whether something like that exists.
So I'm not sure that exists. What it says on your label, if it is systemic, and if it is systemic, it can stay toxic for years. Don't underestimate that. And it is very often you can do other things to clear up insect problems, such as, for instance, you can buy the sticky stuff that you can put on a fruit tree. If your fruit tree has aphids, those aphids are often maintained by ants. Ants love to milk aphids, and the ants come up from the ground. Now, if you put a sticky band on your trunk, the ants cannot get up, and the parasitic wasps get the opportunity to parasitize your aphids. And they are not defended by the ants anymore, and so you can get rid of your aphids that way. It's not too difficult. With rose aphids, many people still spray for rose aphid. There is just wait, because there is a very good parasitic wasp out there for rose aphids, and also hoverflies. Their larvae eat a lot of aphids, and ladybirds eat a lot of aphids, and so they will control it, but you have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, great reminders. Thank you. I'm just flicking back and forth between our chat and Q&A. If you've got any last questions, do pop them in. This is post today. Are you available for a native bee workshop at a community garden? Are you going out and about still, Katja, and to give advice on a soon to be developed butterfly and bee garden?
I do go out, but recently the talks have picked up very, very much. So it depends on whether I have time. I do about 20 a year, and I don't want to do many more.
Fair enough. I know. We need a few more of you. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I know there's definitely other people in the networks as well that can help promote the key messages and have some experience with bees and butterflies as well, so we can share the load. So yeah, if you're interested in some other people that you might like to engage, if Katja's too busy, then yeah, do contact us. Yeah. Awesome. And there, some good notes in here as well. Nat just reminded everyone that there's a great Plant Selector Plus tool that helps you to see if your soil plant is suited to clay soil. We'll make sure that we send that send that one out in the resources, and we'll make sure we send you all those links to those QR codes just in case you didn't catch them at the end. Yeah, and a great little tip from David at the Black Forest Conservancy group. You mentioned that many gardens are too small to grow eucalypts, but it's possible to prune and reduce the size of eucalypts such as mallees, and therefore make them more suitable for small urban environments such as gardens. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that tip, David.
Is absolutely true, but you still want to have the local species. I
Yes.
work at the Waite Arboretum, and I did a project where I looked at, well, what bees go to our South Australian eucalypts that we have here, what go to the Western Australian eucalypts, and what go to the Queensland eucalypts. And our bees strongly prefer the South Australian eucalypts.
We've got to keep it local, hey?
Yeah,
That's the overarching message, yeah. And what a unique, ecosystem we have here in South Australia. You have alluded to it as you've been talking, Katja, but is there a network of bee researchers like yourself? You were mentioning all those different species at the front of this session that still haven't are known. Is there a team of you or a network, or how does it work?
Oh, this is quite terrible. There's very little funding for taxonomy in general and insect taxonomy specifically. We know a third of our insects, maybe. We know more about bees than about other insects, but there is very little funding. So all bee taxonomists in Australia do it in unpaid or in their spare time. The main author of the 71 species is Remco Lees. He is an honorary at the museum and he gets a small grant, but then works 2 years on this piddly bit of money, which we are very grateful for. But and so there is one bee taxonomist associated with the Victoria Museum. He's not paid to do bee taxonomy. There is a retired bee taxonomist with the Western Australian Museum, and he still publishes, but he's getting old. And similar with the in Sydney, and so there is 5 bee taxonomists basically in Australia, and most of them, all but one, are over 60.
Yeah. And we raise that often with when we do some of these sessions with different researchers like yourself, because the people online and the community in general can be advocates around securing and getting more funding into researching around these amazing species and ecosystems. And, I think sometimes we take that for granted, that we need this foundational knowledge about what exists in order to know how to protect it and look after it as well. So, as much as people don't like to talk about it, and it can be a bit of doom and gloom, I do like to, make people aware of that so that they can advocate and ask their local museums or their research institutions to support this type of work.
But when you know what exists, like those 71 new species, you don't even know yet where they occur necessarily, because you just found them in one spot. And you don't really know, because you found only a few, what plants they rely on and their life cycle. There's so much to know before you can really protect something, unless you do habitat protection. So really good habitat, we need to protect it, because all those species will be in there.
Yeah, in there somewhere. We might not be able to find them because of not as many researchers. But hopefully today we've inspired some more people to get involved in the research as well, and to encourage young people that are coming through to do this type of work as well, because it's so important. So thank you so much. We've come to time. Thank you for joining us today, Katja. It was really fascinating, and I hope it's motivated all of you online to plant more bee food where you can, and also to advocate for this type of research. And please follow up all the links there. Our next series, actually, you linked to it in today's session, so thank you, Katja, is we're going to be talking all about the white ibis with our ecologist, Dr. Liberty Olds, next time. And so if you're on the list, you'll hear all about that, or you can subscribe to our Green Adelaide e-news, and you'll also hear about that there as well. So we'll look forward to exploring another world of an important species in our urban landscape. So thank you all for coming today, and especially special thanks to Katja as well, and see you all next time. Appreciate your time. Have a good evening.
Yeah.